Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
When they pulled the tarp off her car, the music kicked in, something loud and thumpy, clearly made for TikTok, and everybody started clapping like it was the damn Oscars. My sister Kylie stood there gasping like she'd just seen Jesus rise up from under the hood instead of a new white Range Rover, and Dad, beaming from ear to ear, handed her the keys with a dramatic bow that would have made a proposal look modest. There were pink and silver balloons tied to the side mirrors, a sparkly bow slapped on the windshield, and even a local bakery cake with her name scrawled across it in gold icing, like she was being crowned royalty. She squealed and jumped and hugged everyone, while someone, I think Mom's church friend, filmed it all with a ring light like this was a red carpet event and not our cracked concrete driveway in suburban Ohio. I stood to the side with a paper plate and a plastic fork, biting into dry vanilla cake and watching as my father kissed her forehead and told her she deserved the world. Then he turned to me, casual as ever, and said, "Don't worry, Han, we'll do something small for you later." I smiled. I nodded. I said thank you, like a good daughter is supposed to. I even laughed when Kylie joked that maybe I'd get a gas card this year if I played my cards right. And then I helped Mom carry the leftover lemonade and paper napkins back inside. That's what I've always done: smile, nod, swallow. But something about the way he said it, with that offhand tone like I was an afterthought or a pothole in the road he didn't even bother to drive around, it stuck under my skin like a sliver. I've had moments like this before, sure. My whole life has been full of them. But this time, something cracked. And once something cracks, it doesn't take long to shatter. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment with the TV on mute, scrolling through Kylie's Instagram story where she posted every angle of that car, every balloon, every hug, every tag to brands and hashtags and makeup sponsors, thanking them for celebrating this beautiful life milestone. The comments were filled with clapping hands, heart eyes, and "You deserve it, Queen." I stared at that little glowing screen and I thought about my last birthday, 32 years old, and how Mom sent me an e-card with a digital rose and Dad didn't call until 2 days later, blaming a golf game and his bad memory. I thought about the time I graduated college with honors and they mailed me a $50 Target gift card. I remembered the week I had COVID and neither of them checked in except for a text from Mom that said, "Drink fluids." But when Kylie chipped a tooth, I took off work to drive her to the dentist. When Dad had surgery, I rearranged my schedule and stayed in the hospital waiting room for 8 hours. I'm the one they call when the Wi-Fi breaks or the bank app locks them out. I'm the one who always shows up, always helps, always picks up the pieces. And yet, I'm the one who's always told to wait, to understand, to be patient, to accept something small, like that's what I deserve. You ever been in a room full of people you love and feel like a lamp in the corner? Useful, sure. But only if the light's out. Otherwise, they don't even notice you're there. I've felt like that for most of my life. A background character in my own damn story. And every time I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that being the responsible one was its own reward, I shoved the resentment down a little further. But resentment has a half-life longer than regret. It never goes away. It just sits in your bones, waiting. So I did what I always do. I cleaned up. I helped Mom carry the leftover cake to the kitchen. I smiled for the photos and made sure Grandma got home safe. And then I got in my car, my 11-year-old Toyota Corolla with a dented side door and the check engine light that won't quit, and I drove home in silence. No music, no radio. Just that one sentence on repeat in my head: "We'll do something small for you later." When I got home, I took a shower and cried in the steam. I didn't sob, I don't even think I had the energy for that. I just let it come out of me, this quiet, ugly ache that had been sitting in my chest for too long. Then I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, and opened our family group chat. The last message was from Kylie. "Still can't believe I got a freaking Range Rover. Love you all SM," with 6 exclamation marks and 3 heart emojis. Dad had replied with, "You earned it, kiddo." Mom posted a gif of a dancing cupcake. I didn't reply. I didn't like the message. I didn't say goodnight. I clicked the top corner of the screen, tapped leave conversation, and hit yes without blinking. It was small, yes. But It was the first small thing I ever did for me. And it felt bigger than anything they ever gave me. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay awake thinking about all the years I gave away in exchange for being included, being seen, being loved in the way I saw Kylie loved. All the ways I tried to make myself easier to deal with, more helpful, less needy. And how none of it mattered, because no one ever bothers to thank the furniture. They just sit on it and expect it to be there. But what if the furniture got up and walked away? What if the quiet one decided to stop being quiet? Because maybe, just maybe, something small could become something big. The thing about growing up as the dependable one, the reliable one, the daughter who never made waves and always followed the rules, is that you start to believe, almost like a religion, that being unnoticed is something noble. That sacrificing your voice for the sake of keeping peace is some kind of higher moral ground, when in reality, it's just another way people teach you to disappear without having to bury your body. I don't remember the exact moment I learned to blend into the background of my own family, but I know it started early, in moments so small they didn't seem worth remembering at the time. Like when I brought home an art project in 3rd grade and Dad nodded while watching the Browns game, never even glancing at the paper, or when I sang in the school talent show and afterward Mom said, "You did fine, sweetie, but you know Kylie just has more stage presence." Over the years, that kind of casual dismissal, those little splinters of indifference, didn't cut me all at once. They wore me down like water on stone, carving something out of me until I became exactly what they needed, someone who didn't ask for anything. Someone who stayed useful, someone who could be counted on to understand and forgive before an apology was even considered. And while Kylie cried at the drop of a hat and demanded to be heard, rewarded, reassured, I became the silent balancing weight on the scale, holding everything steady while she tipped the whole thing toward herself. Looking back now, I realize how much of my identity was built on the idea of being the one who didn't need help. In high school, I got a part-time job at the grocery store because I didn't want to ask for money. Kylie, meanwhile, bounced between dance, cheer, and piano lessons, all paid for without question. When I got into college, a state school, not fancy, but I earned it, I covered most of the costs with scholarships and waitressing tips, while Kylie dropped out of her community college after 3 semesters, said she needed a mental health break. And Dad handed her a credit card so she could find herself. No one ever told her to be tougher or smarter or more disciplined. No one ever said, "You'll have to figure it out on your own." That was always reserved for me. It's not that I resented her for it, at least not at first. It's more that I kept waiting for someone to notice. For someone to pull me aside and say, "Hey, I see how much you're holding. I see how hard you're trying." But no one ever did. And over time, that waiting turned into something heavier, something that sat in my chest like wet concrete and made it harder and harder to keep smiling at every graduation, every birthday, every shiny new toy handed to Kylie with wide-eyed pride. I started journaling again a few days after the car reveal, and not in some therapeutic, self-love kind of way, but like a woman trying to catalog evidence before a trial. I made a list of everything I remembered doing for my family that no one else seemed to notice. I wrote down every weekend I spent helping Dad clean out the garage while Kylie slept in. I listed every time I dropped off a prescription for Mom or sat in the waiting room during one of her doctor appointments. I wrote about the time I lent Kylie $300 to pay a vet bill for her boyfriend's dog and how she never paid me back, never even brought it up again. I counted every Christmas I hosted in my tiny apartment because no one else felt like cooking. And as the list grew, I realized that all this small stuff they talked about doing for me later, it had already been done by me for them for years. But nothing hit me harder than the photo I found while scrolling through an old backup drive, one I didn't even remember saving. It was from Kylie's 6th birthday party. She was in a princess dress, blowing out candles on a 3-tier cake shaped like Cinderella's castle, surrounded by balloons, cousins, and even a man dressed as a magician in the background. Then I found a photo from my 6th birthday, just me and a store-bought cupcake on a paper plate, sitting in the kitchen in front of a single candle that was already half melted. No party, no guests, no balloons. Just me smiling like I didn't know any better. Maybe I didn't know better back then. But I do now. You know what happens when you make someone feel invisible for long enough? They start to become experts at invisibility. They learn how to move through rooms without being seen, how to swallow pain in silence, how to laugh when their heart is breaking just to make sure no one feels awkward. And that's what I had become, a ghost in my own story, clapping politely from the sidelines while my sister got the spotlight and the applause and the standing ovation. But ghosts have memories. And mine were sharp. Sharp enough to start cutting. I didn't blow up. I didn't scream or throw a tantrum or post some long passive-aggressive rant online. That would have made me easy to dismiss, easy to write off as jealous or dramatic. No, I was done being predictable. I was done being digestible. I was going to do something they didn't expect. I was going to do something that made them pause, rewind, and look again. Not because I needed them to suffer, but because I needed them to feel something, anything, that resembled what I had lived with for 32 years. So I started small, just like they always promised me. I went through my phone and deleted every photo where I was smiling at someone else's celebration, every screenshot of me buying a gift or forwarding a confirmation email for a hotel I booked, every thread where I offered help and got a thumbs up in return. I unfollowed Kylie's account and removed myself from the shared cloud album Dad created for family moments. Then I opened a fresh notebook and wrote one sentence across the first page, in ink that bled through to the back. I was the furniture in the room until I stood up and walked away. And I wasn't done walking. Not even close. There's a certain kind of silence that fills a room after years of forced obedience finally come to a halt. It's not loud, not dramatic, not the kind of silence that follows a slammed door or an argument or a threat. No, this one is quieter, more deliberate. Like the vacuum left behind when someone gets up and walks out of a room without saying a word, taking their energy, their presence, their usefulness with them, leaving nothing but a chair still warm and the slow realization that something important just exited, maybe for good. That's what I became for them after the birthday incident. Not angry, not confrontational, just absent in a way that felt unfamiliar and, eventually, unsettling. Because the thing about people who've grown used to taking you for granted is that they don't realize what you actually do until you stop doing it. The week after Kylie's birthday, I didn't show up to the usual Sunday dinner at my parents' house. The one where I normally brought dessert and washed dishes and asked about Dad's arthritis, while Kylie scrolled through her phone and Mom microwaved leftover pasta with a smile. I didn't text an excuse. I didn't call ahead to say I'd be late. I just didn't go. And that simple absence, the empty seat where I always sat, the dessert that never arrived, the awkward redistribution of chores they didn't even realize I did, was the first drop in what I was beginning to shape into a slow, quiet flood. At work, I found myself watching people differently. The receptionist who always made sure to compliment everyone's outfits except mine. The team lead who never invited me to lunch, but always asked for help when a spreadsheet broke. The coworker who forgot I was in the meeting until it was time to take notes. I saw it all through a new lens, and instead of telling myself, as I always had, that being unnoticed was a reflection of my humility, I started to understand it for what it was. A reflection of how often people will ignore you if you make it easy for them to do so. And I had made it very, very easy. That realization didn't come with fireworks or clarity. It came with exhaustion. I was tired of being quiet. I was tired of being reasonable. I was tired of constantly being the one who understood everyone else's chaos, but never had mine acknowledged. So I started taking things back, piece by piece. I began with the technical stuff, small, subtle adjustments that didn't scream revenge, but whispered it with perfect clarity. I called our family's financial advisor. Dad had listed me as a secondary contact for estate planning years ago, back when Kylie was too young to handle responsibility, and calmly requested to be removed from everything. No drama, no explanation, just a polite and firm, "I'd prefer not to be involved anymore." The man sounded confused, but didn't argue. Next, I logged into the shared Dropbox folder where I'd been storing all of our scanned family documents, birth certificates, insurance policies, photos from Grandma's funeral, even Kylie's resume I edited 3 times. I downloaded everything I needed and deleted my access. Then I blocked their devices from viewing my own shared folders. Small, technical moves. Clean cuts. Then I got a little bolder. Years ago, after Dad semi-retired and started renting out the second property he inherited from Grandpa, I helped him set up the LLC paperwork, walked him through the digital tax filing process, even corrected his write-offs when he got confused about depreciation schedules. He never hired an accountant. He used my free labor. So when I filed an anonymous whistleblower report to the IRS about a suspiciously underreported rental income over several years, backed with documents I still had copies of, I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was doing it out of principle. If he could spend $50,000 on a luxury vehicle to reward Kylie for surviving her mid-20s, he could answer to a few questions from the federal government. And as for Kylie herself, no, I didn't confront her. I didn't unearth our childhood fights or pull receipts from every slight and insult. Instead, I took a different route. I created a Reddit account under a name no one would trace to me and posted a carefully worded story to a subreddit for family estrangement. I included no names, no locations, just phrases, screenshots of text messages, and blurred images that told the story of a golden child with a history of manipulation, a sister who was used and discarded, and a family dynamic built on imbalance. The internet, unsurprisingly, took the bait. The post gained traction fast, and though I never claimed to be the victim or the villain, I let the audience draw their own conclusions. The story didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to be plausible. And painful. By midweek, Kylie's Instagram was unusually quiet. No new videos, no posts about her car, no grateful, blessed captions. I didn't check often, but when I did, I noticed the tone in her last story had shifted. She looked upset. Something was happening. Something had reached her. I didn't feel triumphant, exactly. Just calm. Then came the calls. First it was Mom, twice in the same morning, both going to voicemail. Then Dad left me a message, his voice low and gravelly, trying to sound casual, but clearly strained. Hannah, I don't know what's going on, but listen, we need to talk. We don't want things to get weird. You've made your point, I think. But this is family. Call me back. He paused for a second too long before hanging up. There was something about that sentence, you've made your point, I think, that lit a small, cold flame in my stomach. Because what they still didn't understand was that I hadn't made a point at all. I hadn't done any of this to prove something. I wasn't staging a rebellion or throwing a tantrum. I was just done. Done explaining. Done earning love. Done auditioning for basic respect. I wasn't burning the house down. But I had, very carefully, lit a match. And I knew exactly where to place it next. There's something uniquely satisfying, almost poetic in its symmetry, about silence being used as both punishment and salvation, when the people who once depended on your endless patience, your immediate replies, your calendar that bent like rubber around their chaos, suddenly find themselves on the outside of your life, knocking on a door that no longer opens on command, unsure of what they've done wrong but still too proud, or too blind, to admit it. That was the space I had entered now, not one of screaming matches or bitter ultimatums, but something colder, cleaner, and more permanent, a withdrawal, a vanishing of the roles I had quietly inhabited for decades, and the look on their faces, even from a digital distance, told me they were just beginning to understand that I wasn't playing the part anymore. The first real crack in Kylie's online persona came 5 days after the Reddit post started gaining attention, and while I hadn't checked it obsessively, the post had been screenshotted, shared across platforms, and dissected in comment threads full of strangers who speculated about every blurred name and redacted message, strangers who didn't know my family, but somehow understood everything about it. I didn't admit it was about me, not even to myself in any obvious way, but seeing the validation pour in, people recognizing the gaslighting, the golden child syndrome, the decades of emotional negligence. I would be lying if I said it didn't give me a sense of dark satisfaction. It wasn't revenge, not really. It was exposure, a light finally shone on something I'd been told for years was all in my head. Kylie's next TikTok wasn't a dance or a makeup review or a car tour. It was a blurry, dimly lit clip of her speaking into the front camera with red eyes, no filter, and a voice so fragile I almost didn't recognize it. She talked about betrayal in vague terms, about how sometimes the people closest to you turn against you, and how jealousy can rot a family from the inside. There were no names, of course, no accusations, just the familiar baiting for sympathy that had worked so effortlessly for her since she was a child, an unspoken cry for the audience to validate her version of the story without needing to know the truth. And they did, at first. The comments came in like comfort food. You don't deserve this. They're just haters. Protect your peace, girl. But there was hesitation too. A few people asked questions. A few connected the dots. And I watched, not gleefully, not maliciously, but with the clinical calm of someone observing an overdue consequence finally being set into motion. Mom's first voicemail was exactly what I expected, teary, rambling, full of the kind of guilt-wrapped kindness that's meant to soothe without admitting anything was ever truly wrong. Hannah, sweetie, I don't know what's happening, but we want you to come over. We want to talk. We miss you. Thanksgiving's coming up, and I already got the cranberry sauce you like. Please don't shut us out like this. We love you no matter what. There was a tremble in her voice, not just from emotion but from confusion, like someone standing in the middle of a suddenly empty room, spinning in slow circles, unable to understand when the furniture disappeared. Dad followed it with a single-line text, "It's time we talk. Please." No punctuation, no name. That's how I knew it was serious. He never kept his messages that brief unless something had truly shaken him. And maybe it had. Maybe it was the IRS letter he might have received by now. Maybe it was the sudden shift in Kylie's public image. Or maybe it was the loss of control, the realization that I no longer needed to play the role of helper, fixer, buffer, the daughter who quietly absorbed disappointment like a sponge and came back for more with a forced smile. Instead of replying, I booked a weekend trip to Sedona. I'd never been, but the idea of red rocks, dry air, and silence that belonged to no one but me felt like the right antidote to a lifetime of rooms filled with other people's noise. I didn't announce it. I didn't post a countdown or a boarding pass. I simply packed a bag, turned off my notifications, and left. And for 3 days, I walked trails, sat alone at wine bars, stared at the stars with no one asking what I was thinking, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, entirely untouched. There was no one to center, no one to care for, no one to apologize to. Just me, my thoughts, and the understanding that this quiet wasn't a void, it was a choice. When I came back, I felt no obligation to explain where I'd been. I checked my mail, watered my plants, and found a letter under my door. No envelope, no return address, just a single folded page tucked inside like a secret someone wasn't sure they had the right to share. It was Dad's handwriting. Slanted, precise, the same way he'd filled out my permission slips in high school, the same way he signed Christmas cards with just his name, "Never love, Dad." The letter wasn't long. It wasn't even particularly emotional. It was apologetic in tone but defensive in content, as if he were performing the shape of remorse without ever acknowledging its weight. He said things like, "I know I wasn't perfect, and we all make mistakes," followed by the phrase that stuck with me the most, "You've always been the strong one, and maybe we leaned on that too much." No ownership. No mention of Kylie's car, or the years of unequal treatment, or the many birthdays where my only gift was a reheated dinner and a shrug. Just vague sentimentality, a few lines about family being forever, and a request to sit down like adults and work through this. It ended with his name. Just Rick. Not Dad. I stood there in my kitchen, the letter limp in my hand, the refrigerator humming softly behind me, and I realized that for all the words on that page, there wasn't a single line in it that made me feel anything but tired. Not angry. Not sad. Just tired in a way that no nap or weekend getaway could ever fix. It was the kind of fatigue that settles into your bones after years of holding up the foundation for people who never once asked how heavy it was. So I did what I needed to do. I took the letter outside, struck a match, and burned it in the ceramic planter on my balcony. It wasn't an act of rage. It wasn't symbolic. It was just trash removal. The next morning, I sat down at my laptop, opened a blank document, and wrote a new message, not to them, not to the public, not to the internet, but to myself. I typed a single sentence, letting it appear slow and steady on the screen like a verdict being passed. I will not be the one who makes this right. And with that, I hit save, closed the lid, and poured myself a glass of water. Thanksgiving was 6 days away. And this year, I wouldn't be bringing pie. There's an eerie sort of stillness that comes after you've finally made peace with being misunderstood, when you no longer flinch at the silence, no longer scroll back through old messages trying to decipher their tone, no longer imagine what you'd say if given the floor, because you've accepted, with a kind of worn-out grace, that the floor was never going to be yours to begin with. In the days after I burned the letter and sent nothing back, I expected the attempts to escalate, maybe even for the family to show up at my door, but instead, there was just a lull. Not absence, exactly, more like a holding pattern, like they were circling overhead, unsure how to land in a world where I'd finally walked off their stage. I think they were waiting for me to cool off, to come back to the table and resume my part as the level-headed one, the bridge builder, the grown-up in the room, the one who could be relied upon to be civil and generous even when no one else bothered. But what they didn't know or couldn't fathom is that this wasn't about heat anymore. This wasn't about anger. It wasn't about punishment or revenge or dramatic cutoffs. It was about something quieter and more permanent, a resignation, an understanding that I'd spent too many years trying to earn something from people who didn't even know they were holding it. And then, the day before Thanksgiving, I wrote my own letter. Not out of guilt, not out of some aching desire to be seen or forgiven, but because I needed to say something on my own terms, not through a phone call I didn't want to answer or a family dinner I didn't plan to attend, but through words laid out with intention, measured and calm, without room for interruption or manipulation. I sat at the table with a cup of black coffee and the early morning sun slanting across the floor, and for the first time in a long time, I wrote not to be heard, but to be finished. The letter wasn't long. I didn't list offenses or drag up every instance where I'd been passed over or dismissed, because I knew that kind of accounting would only lead to another round of defensive rewrites on their part, another round of, "That's not how we remember it." Instead, I chose precision. I wrote, "I learned how to disappear by watching you. Every time I needed something and you gave it to Kylie instead, every time you told me to be patient, to be strong, to be the bigger person while rewarding her tantrums with gifts and attention, you taught me that my role was to observe, to adapt, to wait in the wings. I did that for 32 years. I don't want a Range Rover. I don't want a party. I don't want a slice of cake after the candles have burned out. I want space. I want distance. And I want you to know that silence isn't always a punishment. It can also be peace. This is mine now. No sign-off. No with love, no take care. Just the truth, placed plainly in the center of the page like a stone on a grave." I folded it once, slipped it into an envelope, and drove it to their house myself, not to see them, not to catch a glimpse of their confused faces through the window, but because I wanted the act to be deliberate. I parked across the street, waited until no one was outside, and walked up the driveway with the kind of stillness you can only earn after surviving a storm no one else even noticed. I slid the envelope through the mail slot, turned, and walked back to my car without a second glance. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the quiet pressing in like a weighted blanket, but instead of feeling isolated or bitter, I felt grounded. I made myself dinner, nothing festive, just a grilled cheese and tomato soup, and ate it while reading a book I'd been too distracted to finish for months. I didn't check my phone. I didn't refresh Kylie's Instagram. I didn't call anyone to explain. Because the thing is, when you finally decided to stop begging for a seat at a table that was never set for you, you begin to realize just how many tables there are in the world, how many dinners don't involve performance, how many conversations you can have without editing yourself to keep everyone comfortable. But peace has a strange way of inviting noise. It was just past 8 when someone knocked on my door, not loudly, not frantically, but with the kind of hesitant, uncertain knock that says, "I don't know if I'm welcome here." I sat frozen for a moment, not out of fear, but because I genuinely didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought about how every part of me had been trained to open the door, to mediate, to soften, to listen. But I also thought about that letter, about the ink still drying in their house, about the years that had led me to this moment. The knock came again. I stood, walked to the door, and paused with my hand on the knob. I didn't open it. Not because I didn't care, but because, for the first time in my life, I cared about myself more. And maybe they were out there. Maybe Dad with his furrowed brow, Mom holding a covered dish like an offering, Kylie with some new story painted across her face. Or maybe it was a neighbor, a delivery mistake, a coincidence. But I didn't check. I didn't need to. Because the point was never whether they came. The point was that I wasn't waiting anymore. So I turned away, walked back to the couch, and sat down. Not as a daughter. Not as a peacemaker. Not as a forgotten piece of the furniture. But as myself. And for once, that was more than enough.